Hello everyone, welcome back to the TED Talks YouTube channel and podcast. Now, this title is another provocative title that people like to post about and like to talk about. What would I do with £10,000? Well, £10,000, as I said in my video about £1,000, you do have a decent amount of money. That's the first thing. So firstly, congrats on saving that much money. I assume you've saved it or earning it or however you've generated it, unless it's naughty stuff. Because in a world where people have savings of like a fiver, £4.50, and you live paycheck to paycheck, well done you for saving that much money. Like, I have to say that. That's the first thing. So there's a fly in the room. That is the first thing that I have to say, because that is no mean feat in today's world. Especially if you've kept it to the side and you're like looking for someone to actually invest it, instead of saying, oh, let me go to Balmain, let me go to, Balenciaga or something. So the first thing I think I'd spend £10,000 on is actually what I'd spend £1,000 on. And you've seen that video in that podcast, so you've heard I would spend it on education and network. Because now you've got £10,000, actually you can spend a small percentage of that on your education, on learning, on getting surrounded by the right people. And then the rest of it we can spend on actually investing in getting the ball rolling. And I know it's small enough where you're going to feel like, oh, do I want to spend that on education when I could put it all into this? It's like, well, if you don't know what you're doing, then why don't you just go to Las Vegas, and fucking the same shit, right? You probably got a better chance there if you don't know what you're doing. In property, deal sourcing and rent to rent are, for the sort of 10,000 and below mark, they are your strategies. Doing deal sourcing, which what most people do, is a great stepping stone into actually buying property yourself. It's not easy, it's hard, but it does have a low startup cost. Same with rent to rent. You can get started on a rent to rent from probably 4, 5, 6 grand. So actually with 10K, you've got enough for your education, your networking, your community, and then actually to put into a deal, which can give you 4, 5, 6, £700 a month back. If you're mad negotiation and, blah, 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 you could even get 2 rent to rents for this price. Now, I'm not an expert on rent to rent. I will do a video actually on why I don't do rent to rent and why I was going to, but then why I stopped. Now, I was almost about to secure one when I stopped. So pretty last minute U-turn. So for me, I'd spend a little bit on education and networking, and then I would spend the rest on a rent to rent or deal sourcing, or you keep saving, and if your job is really bringing in that much money, then it may not be long before you generate enough that you're like, okay, I can buy now. You're not miles off buying, definitely a good 200-300 meters away from it, right? So we have to know where we are. And this is as simple as going on Rightmove, looking at the areas you're looking at. If you don't know what area, leave a comment below or send me a DM on Instagram. And then just doing the maths, simple maths. I cover it in my book, which is somewhere on this bookshelf. I only have draft copies there, actually. The real copies just keep selling out, yeah. Do the maths on that and work it out. You don't need to make it complex at this stage, just to understand, right, how much do I need? How much do I have? Does it work out? Etc, etc. With 10 grand, you can still look at non-property things. Like I said in my, talk about £1,000, you can still do other stuff with 10K. You can make a decent impact somewhere with 10K. So don't always think I have to do property, then do property. You could do something else which generates the money to get you into property. Of course, though, being surrounded by it, being involved in it is going to help and is going to potentially help you get there quicker. Don't always necessarily look for that, because rent to rent just may not work around you or may not suit what you're doing. So why would you bother? But for me, education, rent to rent, or deal sourcing is what most people do with £10,000 or less. It's what I would do with £10,000 or less. As an aside, you could look for a JV partner or private investment, but then you really need some education there. You need money for the JV contracts, the loan agreement contracts, unless you do my e-learning. Booking a call, people. So you're going to need some money there that maybe we didn't necessarily think about. But there could be someone who has lots of money, bit of experience, and just wants to JV with someone for whatever reason, right? Now, could you buy a property with £10,000? Not with £10,000 alone, you can't. Look at the cheapest house in the UK, 40 grand. And I doubt, it's hard to find that now in areas that, you'd want to have a house in. And even then, tough. 25% deposit is 10K. What about fees? Stamp duty? Although it won't be if it's $39.99. What about the refurb? If you're doing a BR or a flip, you might find a really cheap flat somewhere that you could buy, but actually getting lending on it is going to be really difficult because it's sub 75k, sub 60k for some lenders. So actually, even if you could afford somewhere that cheap, there is, a chance that the long-term product for this strategy, for this deal, isn't really going to exist and isn't actually going to work unless you had 40 grand cash, which obviously you don't, because you're talking about 10 grand or less. So buying is going to be very, very difficult in your current state. However, if you have investors or if you have JVs, and there are ways to learn about this again, put your education towards that, you can absolutely buy. But then it comes back to, what do you bring to the table? If it's not money, if it's not if it's not experience, then what is it? And who should you JV with? How should you JV? Should you even use investor finance? Can you even raise it? It's going to be pretty difficult, right? There's things to think about here. So on that note, people, make sure you hit like, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the bell notification, and share it with your friends. People, share it with your friends and your enemies.